Are you ready for this holiday season? Physically, mentally, are you ready for it? Well, that's the theme of this episode. Welcome back to the WHOOP podcast. I'm your host, Will Ahmed, founder and CEO of WHOOP. Today, we have the fearless Kristen Holmes and Emily Capodilupo, who oversee all things performance and research at WHOOP to help you unlock your holiday season. That means getting the right sleep, managing travel, managing all the sweets and alcohol that come with the holiday season, and a lot more. This is the WHOOP Holiday Hacks podcast coming right now.
Emily, it's that time of year again.
So excited to talk about the holidays with you today.
All right, we are going to give our listeners all sorts of fun advice on how to manage the holiday season with, a little bit more joy, really emphasizing connection and kind of how to show up as your best self. There are some unique challenges over the course of the holidays. So we want to acknowledge those and talk through how we can mitigate the negative effects on our mental, physical, and emotional health as much as possible. So it's really this balance between kind of indulgence and self-care and figuring out how we can, best create conditions where we can really thrive during the holidays. So I always like to think about the holidays as like the tournament time, and we're trying to peak for that. So we're through obviously Thanksgiving and we've got a couple weeks before Christmas and other holidays that folks might be celebrating, just holidays in general. So, if we think about this as like kind of our preparation period for that, what are some things that people can do to kind of position themselves so they're just ready to go for the holidays?
Oh, there's so many different ways to
I
think
know.
about answering that question. It comes down to, you know, your relationship to the holidays, what it is that you're doing.
Mm,
When I think about, for example, traveling to go see family, maybe traveling that's stressful or, seeing family that could be stressful or even just people you love and are excited to see, but
mhm,
not necessarily an environment that's like super conducive to maintaining your workout schedule, sleeping schedule, eating habits, all of those things tend to get very disrupted this time of year. And so you want to think about like banking some good things, right? Like, so can you make a little bit more time for some of that in advance? Some of the work that we did a couple years ago with the COVID Resilience Project really does show that you can bank some of these
yeah,
benefits. So we saw that like people who maintained good sleep consistency prior to the pandemic, when their schedules and lives got like really stressful and upended during those first 6 weeks of the pandemic, even if their sleep schedule totally
crap.
went to crap, they actually did better than people who had similar sleep consistency in those first 6 weeks,
Mhm,
but worse sleep consistency prior. So, like, good behavior, good, circadian behavior, sleep consistency now will make you more resilient to the stress of the disruption
mhm,
during the holidays, and so there really is something very real about, like, bank some of that good stuff.
mhm,
Know that, you're going to indulge at your grandma's Christmas Eve dinner, okay, so, like, say no now. There's so many snacks in the office this time of year, there's so many holiday parties, there's so much. I kinda hate the, like, earn it mentality, but there is
yeah,
something real there of, like, it's not gonna throw you as much if you
mhm.
indulge.
I don't
And
mind the earn it mentality. Like, I think there's something, real to that. I love what you're saying, though, about this notion that we can actually increase our tolerance
Mhm.
for future stress, right?
Yeah.
So going into the holidays depleted is probably not a good strategy, right? So there's a lot of things that we can do in the lead up to really allow ourselves to minimize the impact
Mhm.
of that disruption, on our kind of overall state. When you go into the holidays already depleted and then you finally make it there, you're in a situation where you're probably a lot more vulnerable. So maybe just talk about how, building this capacity and buffer in the system essentially helps our immune system. Because that's another thing. We're interacting with a lot of folks. We're, again, disrupting
Yeah.
our things. So if we kind of go in already depleted, we're pretty vulnerable.
Yeah, and I think, like, people became more and more aware of this over the last,
Mm,
4 years with the pandemic and whatnot, but the more you do now, and we still have 2 weeks, right?
yeah.
The more you're doing now to hydrate well, to eat well, to
Mhm,
rest well, so that your body goes into that, like, immune assault, which
mhm.
is kind of inevitable unless you spend your holidays, in the
In a
cabin
bubble.
alone or whatever in your bubble, the less likely you are to get sick. And then
Right.
even once you're in that environment, continuing to make as many of those good decisions as you can. So
Mm,
alcohol is really gonna tax your immune system, make it
right.
harder to fight these things off. And
Sugar.
so, yeah, sugar, which just causes inflammation and
Yep.
whatnot. But and I think probably among these, the easiest one is hydrating, because it doesn't require saying no to anything that's tempting. So just really make an effort to hydrate.
Yeah.
Add 2 more glasses of water than you might
Mhm.
otherwise think about consuming, especially if you're flying, because that air on airplanes is really dehydrating. It's,
Yeah.
like, super dry. But, anything you can do now going to increase the likelihood. And even if you don't, like, get exposed to a virus, like, there's also just stress to travel. There's circadian
Mhm.
disruption. There's kind of the heightened alertness of not being in your own space where you don't,
Right.
like, fully relax, and all of those things. And so just being, like, robust to that stress is
Yeah.
going to pay off and make your holidays feel a lot more enjoyable.
I love that's a good little laundry list for folks to think about. So, let me see. Moving too, just getting a lot of that, even if it's low level movement, throughout the day. I think making sure to distribute your macronutrients across the day. So you get to that holiday party at night and you're not overindulging. You feel like you've already hit maybe even your protein targets going into that. You're likely to feel, less tempted to, reach for stuff that is, kind of less healthy. And I think the other thing I just add to the pregame, I suppose, or the build up to the playoffs, which is the
Mhm.
holidays in this analogy, would be to make sure that you're strategic. Like, I think sometimes we just kinda let the holidays happen to us,
Yeah.
and I think that there's a lot to be said in terms of planning, so just really looking at your calendar, "Alright, what holiday parties do I have? Where am I gonna indulge? Where am I not?" Just to kinda keep yourself, to your point, I think
Mhm.
robust is the right word. The other thread I wanted to pull on that you mentioned a bit earlier was this, the you said the holiday means different things to different people. So for some folks, it's like the most joyous time of the year, and for other folks, it's not. Maybe, someone has you know, a a loved one who's passed away during the holidays, right? So or is just missing a loved one,
Mhm.
during the holidays. So, I think there's also an opportunity to kind of reflect or to think in advance of what do you need to actually feel safe internally, and a lot of the things that we talked about behaviorally
Mhm.
helps create that internal safety, but also, how we are thinking about the holidays and framing it in a way that maybe is more challenging versus threatening,
Mhm.
and I wanted to talk a little bit about our study that we did, the
Mhm.
the sleep stress and blood pressure study, where we were able to look at the independent effects of, when we perceive a situation as threatening versus challenging, that there are like um changes in our physiology, but most importantly, it affects our sleep. And, we talked about sleep wake consistency really building robustness, and that's kind of a path to getting more restorative sleep. But I think restorative sleep in the lead up is also going to be really helpful. So, figuring out what are ways that we can think about more intentionally and bring kind of a framework of challenge versus threat to, so we are basically going to improve our chance for better sleep, and that's really what we saw in the study is that people who perceive their day as challenging actually had a better night's rest the previous night versus folks who perceive their day as threatening.
Yeah, I'd love to just is a little bit of a tangent, but I think such an important point that you're
Mm,
bringing up, which is that appraisal super matters. And I
yeah,
think that it's hard to appreciate this because it's very easy to think like, you know, this thing is hard because that's a fact. It's hard. This isn't
Mhm.
something that I've mastered, or whatever. But your attitude matters a ton. There's this study that I think about all the time as a parent where they randomized a group of, I think they were fifth graders. And for half of the group, they said, this math test you're about to take is really hard. Just do your best.
Mm.
And the other half, they said, this test is super easy. You've learned all this material. Like, you've got this. And I think there was something like a 30% difference in their performance. And it was a
Mhm.
totally it was the same, like, school's fifth graders. They
Mhm.
broke them in half. So they all had exactly the same, like, education and prep going into it, and then just they sit down to the test, and one group they say, "This is hard," the other group they say, "This is easy," and their performance wildly different. So how can we apply that, right, to these situations and, like, think about the elements of the holidays that are, like, you know, there's this kind of, like, corny thing, right? Like, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. But it's, like, true, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you focus on the travel's gonna suck, there's gonna be
Mhm.
traffic, I'm gonna hate it, like, the kids are gonna be grumpy, like, confirmation bias kicks in, and the
Mhm.
travel's gonna suck.
Yeah.
And if you're just like, "I'm gonna focus on I'm so excited this Christmas that my daughter's gonna meet her great-grandmother for the first time,
Mm.
and that's why we're going to Michigan, and, yeah, it would be so much easier if everybody came to us, but, like, I'm really excited for them to have that,
Yeah.
and, like, just,
That reframe.
like, reframe, and,
Mhm.
like and then nothing else matters because my daughter gets to meet her
Mhm.
great-grandmother.
And you tapped gratitude there,
Yeah.
and you kind of brought it outside yourself and you're thinking about your daughter, like, so all of those are important, I think, aspects to the reframe, you
Yeah,
know?
and I think, like, people kind of know this, right? Because,
Mhm.
like, if it all was shitty, you wouldn't do it, right? Like, you're not traveling for the holidays to torture
Right.
yourself, and so I think, like, we talked about the food and the exercise and the hydration as mental or as, physical
Mhm.
preparation for the holidays, but I also think, like, take the moment to, like, hone your mantra a little bit,
Mhm.
and then just, like, why are you doing this? What's good? And just try not to, like, focus on the other elements.
Mhm.
Plan for them, be realistic,
Yeah.
like, traffic is going to be heavy, I'll leave
Right.
an hour earlier, like,
Mhm.
whatever it
Mhm.
is, but you will turn the travel from, "I'm so focused on, like, what a nightmare O'Hare Airport is going to
Mhm.
be," versus, "I'm so excited," for my daughter to meet her great-grandmother, and, like, your whole experience will change. The way that, like, we've seen in our data, like,
Mhm.
we ask people what they anticipate for the upcoming day is challenging versus
Mhm.
threatening. It was a huge predictor
Yeah.
of how well they slept, and so you get to decide how you want to internally
Mhm.
talk about your day, and I think, like, hopefully, with very few exceptions, people are being dragged to travel that they have no, like, excitement about, right?
Yeah.
And I think in most cases, it's like, yeah, getting there is a little difficult, and the bed's not as comfy as your bed, and it's going to be noisy with all the kids running around or whatever, but, don't make that your mantra and, like,
Right.
what you're thinking about. Accept that as part of the process and remind yourself why, despite all that, you all agreed that this is the only place we wanna be or the best place we wanna be for the
Yeah.
holidays.
I love that, and I think folks need to recognize that, like, reframing is, like, a really important skill and a path to positive psychological functioning, and it's like we kinda need to practice that,
Mhm.
and this is a great opportunity, the holidays to really kind of practice this skill of reframing because the way you tap too is, like, there is an energy mobilization that's happening when you're reframing that's putting you in a position to be able to enjoy mentally, physically, create a response that allows you to mentally, physically, and emotionally enjoy your environment. I love that, and I feel like we haven't really, talked much about that
Yeah.
on, on the podcast. So I think this is an awesome kind of new type of insight,
Yeah,
so
well, we
for
gotta mix it up because we do this every
I
week.
that's exactly right. So hopefully people feel like that's really valuable and something that they can, think more intentionally about, as they head into the holidays. All right, we've gotten through our little pregame. Well, now we're into actually the pregame. So we've had the 2 week kind of build up where we're making our system as robust as possible. And now we're like in the pregame. So we're traveling in a couple days, either by car or by plane. Talk about, some of the really tactical things that we need to do to kind of be able to, mitigate some of those negative effects.
Yeah, so a couple different ways to think about that, and I'll get to the travel and the time zone stuff itself in a second. It's worth taking a moment to do your homework about what is the, like, environment that I'm landing in.
Mm,
Now, for some people, it might be I'm going, to my parents' house and I know exactly what everything is. It could be we're going to an Airbnb and I don't know, or a hotel, who knows, whatever. It's worth checking in on, like, if you're going to be sleeping on somebody's couch in the basement, which, happens a lot of times. People try and squish a lot of family together this time of year. Like, it might be possible, especially if you're driving or somebody's driving, right, to just make sure, like, do we know that the Airbnb or whatever has, like, enough, or the house that we're going to, like, has enough blankets and pillows and,
mhm,
like, towels or whatever for however many people we're squishing in there, and you might wanna pack some of those
right.
things. And then certainly, if you have specific requirements, like, do they have a crib? Do they have a high chair? Like, making sure, like, because you can organize, there are all kinds of, like, kind of rental companies that'll bring some of that equipment in. You can also rent, like, bedding and pillows or whatever, for the weekend. Like, all those
Mm,
companies exist, especially if you're going to big cities, and so just making sure that, like, you will be comfortable, because sort of once you get there, especially if it's, like, Christmas Eve, it's a little bit too late to get new supplies. And so thinking about what are things I can bring, that'll make sure that I have good quality sleep despite potentially, like, less than ideal sleeping arrangements. Beyond that, especially if you're flying, I'd really think about getting a good water bottle that's, like, at least 32 ounces of, capacity.
mm,
If you're not flying first class, they're gonna come around and give you 6 ounces of water 2 or 3 times on, a flight
mhm,
across the country, and it's just not enough.
right.
Um, and so, bring an empty water bottle, fill it up in the airport. They have those free refill stations all over
Mhm,
the place. And then really, like, even if you're not feeling thirsty, just make a point of, like, your kidneys can process a liter of water an hour, so the risk of overhydrating
mm.
is pretty non-existent.
And
But
you're
the
just
the
losing a
risk
lot
of
of water
getting
on a flight.
dehydrated, you
Yeah,
lose so much more water than you
it's
realize because 'cause you're not moving that much,
mm,
and you're just sitting there.
it's
And
just
then,
so damn dry.
yeah, and there's all kinds of funny things, like airplane food is extremely salty
Mm,
because the dryness actually makes everything taste blander, and so they oversalt the food to, like, give it any amount of flavor, and so you have, like, this super dry air and super salty food,
that's a fun
which is,
fact, Emily.
um
Nice.
yeah, well, so, like, you just need to drink so much more water than you think, and
Mm,
a sort of good reminder is by the time you feel thirsty, you're actually quite dehydrated, so you wanna drink ahead of thirst, not
mhm,
drink to thirst. And pay attention to the color of your urine. That's, like, a better indicator than thirst. I think of thirst as a very late sign,
mm,
and your urine getting darker can be an earlier sign, although intermittent. And it's also, in a more extreme case, worth paying attention to, like, if you go a whole 6-hour flight without peeing, you're definitely not drinking enough water.
yeah,
So it's both the color of the urine and, like, "Oh, shit, it's been a long time,"
right.
which can happen on these flights. But in an even better world, right, you're actually bringing healthy food with you on the plane
Yeah,
'cause, likely it's not available at the
mhm,
airport. That's all going to be crap, and you wanna think about food that has high water content,
mhm,
which will make it even easier, so, like, fruit, vegetables,
mhm.
salad,
And try to
um,
go into your trip relatively well fed.
well fed
I
and
think that's a
hydrated, yeah.
good yeah, that's just a good standard operating procedure, so you're not having to rely on airport food or
Right, because then you're eating salty crap, and it's
yeah,
like, that's not the stuff you want. You're super hungry, so when they come around with chips, you're like, "Yeah, I'll have
yeah,
whatever you'll give me." And I think actually there's a sort of broader holiday hack there around just all of the indulgent crap that's
mhm,
provided to us. If you go into a holiday party where it's basically chips and dips and fried food
Yeah.
and whatever. If you've already eaten dinner, then you can have a couple bites as a fun
Mhm.
indulgent snack and enjoy it versus, like, make a whole meal out of,
Uh,
junk because, like, you're
right.
legitimately hungry, and so now you're looking for, like, a dinner's worth of
Yeah.
food. Um
And if you're in those situations, you can think about, all right, I'm going to have the teriyaki chicken stick and then I'm
Yeah,
going to have the carrots and celery. And, you kind of eat as much of that as you need to kind of be satiated. And then maybe you pick like one treat or something,
yeah.
but again, little strategy.
I'm a huge fan of having the treats and whatnot.
Mhm.
I read something that I found helpful a while back, which is if you are eating, like, a chocolate cake or, like, a
Mm.
delicious dessert, right? Like, the first bite's amazing, the second bite is good, the third bite's okay, and then it, like, is the kind of the same from
Mm.
there, and, like, kind of that mindfulness of, like 'cause then you try and chase that, like, first bite
It's the same with
experience.
alcohol.
Oh, yeah,
I
but,
mean,
like, that,
it's,
like, first bite
yeah.
moment of, like, "Oh, wow, this is amazing," and then you, like, eat the whole cake, and you're like, "I actually, like, really didn't, like, need 80% of
I
this." Like, I
know.
got all the joy at, like, just that little tip.
It's the same with coffee. Like, I'm like, I don't need a venti. Like,
No,
like it gets worse as I go. So
yeah,
I'm like, it's really the first half a cup that I'm, like, really enjoying, and then the
mhm,
rest is kind of like, "What am I actually doing here?"
yeah, so I think just, like, nourishing your
Mm,
body and then enjoying, but, like, paying attention to, like, is this first bite joy or not anymore, and then, like,
yeah,
kinda cutting it off there, but
yeah,
back to the travel
yes.
thing. I'm just gonna keep saying hydrate, hydrate,
Mm,
hydrate. You heard it. I'll try and stop, but, um, the other thing is a lot of people like window seats because they don't like to be bothered.
mm,
For those longer flights, the advantage of an aisle seat is you can get up, and you will feel better if you move a little bit, so, find a moment where the fasten seatbelt
mhm,
sign is turned off and just walk the aisle a little
mhm,
bit. If you can't do that, think about, rolling your ankles, and if you have enough leg room because 'cause you're
mhm,
short like me, you can, like, wiggle your knees, up to your chest, different things, like, roll your
mhm,
shoulders. You'll get really stiff if you just sit and, like, zone
mhm,
out to the TV for 6, 7 hours, and then you'll feel pretty crummy because of that stiffness. Our
mhm.
bodies really do want to move. Even when we sleep, we move a
Yeah,
lot. Anybody who's tried to share blankets with anybody
yeah.
in the past would know that. There's definitely an unnaturalness to,
Mm,
like, when you're just packed like a sardine in a tiny seat for 6 hours, so do try and get up every I know it's, like, annoying to disrupt people,
mhm.
but, every 2 or 3 hours if you can and walk around for a couple minutes,
I think too,
and
like,
stretch.
getting in a workout before you leave, if you know when you land, like, you're just not gonna get
Yeah.
an opportunity to work out, like, I always feel so much better, like, when I get that in before
Mm.
travel, and I definitely like, like, I don't if I'm doing a flight that's over 3 hours, 4 hours, like, I typically won't lift, I'll do, like, a longer kind of zone 2 type run or
Mhm.
just a long walk and, maybe some abs and, push-ups and some stretching. But yeah, I think getting a workout in too can make you feel really a lot better in terms of just kind of being able to then lean into just the relaxing and sitting, that can
Yeah.
happen on a plane.
It's a great tip, especially a lower intensity workout could also help you sleep on the plane.
Yeah.
Uh,
If
so
the
can
timing is right.
if the
Yeah.
timing's right.
And that's we can maybe segue into that and then have a really great listener question
Mhm.
from Jamie. It's a good one about altitude. But before we get into that, if we're landing, let's say in California, or even if we're going from the East Coast to the Midwest, there is a time
Yeah.
zone change. So we want to think about, all right, am I acclimatizing to my new time zone? Generally, the holidays you are, because you're not going to
Mhm.
be wanting to go to bed,
Yeah.
at 6 p.m. when you're
Yeah.
in California, right? You're going to stay up. So
Mhm.
you're going to be pushing past your natural preference for sleep. So there is an opportunity to potentially be a little more strategic with your caffeine consumption, for
Mhm.
example. Maybe you have a green tea at 1 p.m., East Coast time, which
Mhm.
is really 4 p.m. West Coast time. And that's going to help you kind of stay up a little bit later than you normally would. So you can kind of think about your caffeine in a way that will help you be able to kind of acclimatize to the new time zone a bit better.
Yeah, so let's take the example, if you're in Boston like us or anywhere on the East Coast and you're going to the West Coast, so it's 3 hours earlier there. So that means that at, say, when you're there in California time, 10 PM will feel like 1 AM. And for social family reasons, you're going to wanna be able to stay up
Mhm.
until 10. So, having a little bit of caffeine, at lunch, even though generally I would say no caffeine
Right.
after lunch, you wanna think about as like, on your travel day,
Mhm.
doing things according to California time, not
Right.
according to East Coast time, and so,
So
a
1
1
PM
Ca
West Coast is gonna be 10
coffee,
AM
right, is a
East Coast.
10 AM, coffee West Coast,
Mhm.
fair game and actually a good idea, it'll help you stay up a little bit later. Um, if you avoid alcohol that night, it'll
Mhm.
also make it a little bit easier to stay up, obviously, because alcohol can make you sleepy. Um, and it can definitely help to nap on that flight because, again, that's gonna relieve some of the sleep pressure, make it
Mhm.
easier to stay up, and that'll make it really easy to get on to West Coast time.
Right.
Let's say now you're doing the opposite, right? You live in California, you're coming home to
Mhm.
Boston for the holidays. So now, I would say, really be careful about the coffee because if you're flying at 9 AM, okay, that's already noon East Coast time, so you wanna get that caffeine in early if
Mhm.
you need it, but you're going to be trying to go to bed earlier than feels natural, which is harder to
Mhm.
adjust to than later because we're kinda good at, like, having a little bit of caffeine, taking a little nap, and staying up 3 hours late. It's really hard to go to bed
Yeah.
3 hours earlier than your body wants,
Mhm.
and this actually, especially if you're in holiday mode, could be a place where alcohol helps.
Yeah. It
Um,
makes you feel a little
like,
sleepy.
it'll help
Yeah.
you be a little bit
Yep.
sleepier, really making sure to
That's where
get
melatonin can be a great
melatonin
strategy.
can help, but so can things like, making sure as early as possible when you wake up, that on that travel day, so you wake up on the West Coast and it's already later, like, get that, morning sunlight in, tell
Mhm.
your body, "We're up."
Yep.
Even getting up a little bit early can help,
Mhm.
and this gets back to your other tip, get up early and get that run in,
Yeah.
which will make the flight more comfortable and help build that sleep
Mhm.
pressure. So if you can wake up a little early on the travel day, then
Mhm.
when,
Going to East
10
Coast
going to the
is
East
so
Coast. So
good.
then
Yeah.
it's like 10 PM on the East Coast when you land, but it
Mhm.
feels like 7 PM, which is super not bedtime, but
Mhm.
you got up early, you
Yep.
exercised, you didn't sleep on the
Yep.
plane, and then maybe, right before bed,
Mhm.
if you wanna have a little melatonin, if you wanna have a holiday drink,
Mhm.
I'm not watching,
Yeah.
like, enjoy, and then when you wake up, that first morning that you're waking up in your new time zone, get that morning sunlight
Mhm.
as early as possible. 3 hours is, like, kind of on the edge if you can feel fine the second morning
Yeah.
or, like, after the first sleep
Yeah.
in either direction. When you
Right.
start to go beyond that, it
Mhm.
does take, another day,
Yeah.
but, the more you can just create strong signals to your body about what the time zone you're in is, so that's
Mhm.
morning sunlight,
Yeah.
wearing blue light blocking glasses in the
After the
evening or
sun
dim light
sets.
after
Yeah.
sunset, eating according to the new time
Time
zone,
zone.
not
Yeah.
doing weird things like,
Yep.
eating breakfast at
And you
11 or
can
something.
even in the couple days in advance of your travel, you can start to shift slightly, your mealtime, shift your exercise time slightly, shift your light exposure, restricting, that will actually make you feel sleepy. Maybe if you're going, West Coast to East Coast and you
Mhm.
want to feel sleepy a little bit earlier, you just kind of back everything up when you're on the West Coast.
Yeah, and that can work. Sometimes it's socially or work-wise a little
Yeah.
difficult, but, the physiology of that's super sound, right? So if
Yeah.
you're,
And
um
we're just talking maybe half an hour here and there, not egregious, big blocks of time necessarily, but just a little bit could be helpful.
yeah, I mean, even an hour can make it
Mm,
more comfortable. So if
yeah.
it works for you, right, 2 days before the travel, you could try to go to bed an
Mhm,
hour earlier and wake up an
mhm,
hour earlier, and again, use the morning sunlight, morning
mhm.
exercise to reinforce that, and then the night before, you do it again, and then now you're functionally only trying to do, like, a 2-hour time zone
Right,
change,
right,
so you can cheat a little bit,
right.
if that works with your schedule, but, that's almost like preloading or front loading the jet
Yeah.
lag.
And
Yeah.
the older that we get, like, the more sensitive we are from a
Mhm.
circadian rhythm standpoint. So, I think for that's also just something to be mindful of, and just an
Mhm.
opportunity to be a little bit more strategic so you can minimize some of that disruption. So when you do get to your new time zone, you're, not as
Mhm.
compromised as
Yeah.
maybe you normally would be, and you can really just, enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
What's up, folks? If you are enjoying this podcast or if you care about health, performance, fitness, you may really enjoy getting a Whoop. That's right. You can check out Whoop at whoop.com. It measures everything around sleep, recovery, strain, and you can now sign up for free for 30 days. So you'll literally get the high performance wearable in the mail for free. You get to try it for 30 days, see whether you want to be a member. And that is just at whoop.com. Back to the guests.
Okay, let's go to this question because
All right.
it's kind of a juicy question.
Ooh, I'm
So it's from
excited.
Jamie, and it's about air travel and traveling to altitude. Hey, Whoop team. Every Christmas, I fly back home to Colorado, and the past 2 years that I have had my Whoop, I always see major hits to my sleep, HRV, and resting heart rate. I know you have spoken about altitude impacting data on the podcast before, but would love any insights you have on, what is happening, what the cause is, and how I can maybe combat it. I've lived in New York for the last 6 years. Since growing up in Colorado my whole life, has my body forgotten my mile-high roots?
I Jamie's definitely not alone in
Yep.
this one. It's remarkably easy to, like, unadapt to altitude.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
It happens pretty
it
quickly,
happens pretty
actually.
quickly,
Yeah.
yeah, and thankfully, most people adapt pretty quickly as
Mhm,
well, but what's going on is that the higher up you go, they say, like, the thinner the air, and
mm,
what they really mean is that, for a given volume of air, let's say a breath worth,
mhm,
there's actually less oxygen in it, and so in order to power our body, oxygen is like fuel. I know we talk about sort of sugar being fuel, but sugar enables, or
mm,
sorry, oxygen enables us to access the energy from sugar. So you have to pair them. So for a given breath, you get less oxygen, but our body still needs to do all of the same amount of things. And so what ends up happening is that we increase our respiratory rate, we breathe more
mhm,
to compensate for each breath being less oxygen rich. Our heart
mhm,
rates go up in order to circulate our blood past this less oxygen rich
mhm,
air in our lungs. And all of a sudden, we're working significantly harder just for the
mhm.
baseline level
Like, to
of being
maintain
alive.
homeostasis,
Yeah.
and we're sympathetically driven
Yeah,
during
right,
that
so you kind
entire
of go into
process,
this, like
yeah.
it's almost like you're constantly low grade working out,
Yeah.
and the fitter you are, the less you're gonna notice this because the more
Mhm,
capacity you have, right? The way to sort of think about this is there are people who can walk briskly and carry a full conversation,
mhm,
complete paragraphs, and there are people that when they're walking briskly, all of a sudden the pauses get longer, the
mhm,
sentences become like 3, 4 words, you can, like, kinda hear their breathing, right? And
yep,
so it's like, um the people who can, like, maintain those brisk walks with full sentences, those people have higher VO2 max, higher aerobic capacity, and so when they go to altitude, they're now like, using more of that capacity, but they might not necessarily feel anything or notice it
mhm,
because, they're fit enough to, and so as you get older and potentially less fit, you're going to feel the altitude more because all of a sudden your body, kinda increases its, like, metabolic rate, in order to meet this new demand, and
mhm.
either you sort of start to get into that place where, "Oh, I notice everything feels a little harder, and, like, I'm breathing more heavily, and the stairs are like, oh," right? I remember the first time I went to Colorado Springs in high school, I landed and felt, like, totally normal, totally fine, and my sister and I were like, "Let's go for a run," and we were, like, got w down 1 block, we were like, "Oh, whoa, we need to slow down. This feels different," and we adjusted, and after a couple days, like, you feel fine and
Yeah.
it's totally comfortable, but going from sea level to Colorado Springs, like,
Mhm.
over a mile of elevation, and yeah, exercising definitely feels different
And
when you do that.
there's not a lot
Mm.
of ways to prepare for that.
No, I mean, there's, like,
Unfortunately,
fancy equipment where that you can,
yeah,
like, train in
but
these,
for the
like, hyperbaric
layperson, yeah.
boxes, but not, like, normal things,
Yeah.
yeah. There's
So,
actually a ton of Olympic athletes, like, intentionally train at
yeah,
altitude because then they come down to sea level and they
yeah.
get the opposite experience, like,
Right,
everything feels easy, the weights feel
right,
lighter, all that kinda
right.
stuff. So
So for Jamie, they're just gonna have to just take the hit on their resting physiology.
yeah, but as your body is working harder, you're actually going to burn more calories,
Mhm,
and so think about eating a little bit more
mhm,
than normal and, because you are working hard, thinking about high quality, nourishing food.
mhm,
I think sometimes what happens is, like, people get hungrier and which
mhm.
makes them snack more, right? And
Yeah,
so then they, fill that increased hunger, increased nutritional need with junk, and that
right,
makes it harder
right.
to adapt. You're also going to consume more water to meet that increased demand. Basically, think about it almost as metabolically getting a bit more exercise,
Mhm,
even if you're not intentionally doing that. So, more water, more food, try and make that more food nutritious. And then again, like, Jamie's talking about noticing the disruption to sleep. That's because it is counterproductive to sleep for us to be working hard.
mhm,
And so our bodies don't want to both be increasing our heart rate, increasing our
mhm.
respiratory rate, and turning off for sleep. And
Right.
so, from a autonomic nervous system perspective, it's very confusing.
Mhm,
And so anticipate that your sleep quality will be lower, which you can compensate by creating a longer sleep opportunity so that the lower quality sleep, you
mhm.
can get more of it. And
Yeah.
then you kind of eventually get the same number of minutes of
Mhm,
restorative sleep. And then just all of the other things that promote sleep, right? So
mhm.
practice good circadian health.
Yeah. Some
Um,
slow paced breathing I find when I'm at altitude really helps. Just
yeah.
focus on like just nice quiet breaths,
Mhm.
kind of makes me feel calmer. And I think because your system is essentially it's trying to get back to a safe place,
Yeah.
and that's why but it has to work so hard to get back to that.
Right. Because physiologically, the adaptation is that we make more red blood cells. And so
Right.
then our blood gains the ability to carry more oxygen.
Mhm,
And so once that happens, everything, the air is still thinner, but we're physiologically better prepared to handle it. But in the meantime, it's perceived as a stress, right? Your
mhm,
body's sort of confused why it's working so hard to get the same. And so when you're talking about like slow paced breathing, right, that's intentional de stressing. And Whoop does have those breathing exercises in the app that
mhm,
you can
mhm,
use if you're a Whoop member, or you can do something like
mhm.
box breathing or any other
And you
kind of,
find those via Stress Monitor.
yep,
Yeah,
in
so
the
they're
stress
go
monitor.
into Stress Monitor feature, and then you'll see the breathing exercises at the bottom.
But in the meantime, if your body is going to be making these more red blood cells, that's also going to create a demand for iron. So really
Mhm.
thinking about super high quality food and iron rich
Iron-rich
foods as
food,
well.
yeah, so, like, spinach and
Spinach, kale, those like green leafy
yeah.
vegetables. Red meat is a good source
Mm,
of iron. A lot of beans have
mhm,
good amounts of iron. And
yeah,
then if you're somebody who's more at risk, or if you know that you're have ever been told by your doctor that you're anemic,
mhm,
potentially taking an iron supplement, although it's worth being aware that those can be constipating, which
mhm,
air travel is as well. And so
mm,
want to be extra careful about hydrating
yeah,
well.
and then just thinking, yeah, again, being, at altitude, just being pretty strategic about alcohol because that
Yeah.
will, you're
Right. It'll hit you
already
so hard.
it will hit you really, really hard, so, just maybe be a bit more conscious of the timing of your alcohol relative to when you intend to fall asleep. Obviously,
Yeah.
the closer the alcohol is to when you fall asleep, the more disruptive to your sleep it's going to be and the more impact it's gonna have on your resting physiology.
Yeah, that's actually a really important just public safety announcement too, that, if you're not adapted to alcohol, the effects are a lot stronger. So
Yeah.
obviously you should never drink and drive, but I think a lot of people unfortunately have this idea of like, I can have a beer and then like drive home from dinner or whatever,
Yeah.
but expect it to hit you harder, and even more so, please don't drink and
Jet
drive.
lagged, altitude, all of
Yeah,
those things are
dehydrated,
gonna alcohol is
tired.
gonna exacerbate those symptoms
Yeah.
and make you more compromised cognitively. So, yeah, just being really aware, during the holidays, about the impact that that's actually having because we can't perceive our
Mm-mm.
own declines cognitively, so it's important that we're really aware of just the the interaction between, these various kind of situations.
Yeah.
All right. So we have another listener question, and this is from Christina. This is one of my favorite topics, but we talked a little bit about alcohol, but she's really wondering kind of this. She's really pitting off, the late meals and late night drinks, kind of which one is worse. Her instinct is that late meals really, and what she sees in her
Mhm.
data is that late meals really impact her resting physiology, but so does alcohol. So which one is kind of worse on the body, a late meal or a late night drink? And does one impact the other more and does which one kind of impacts sleep the most?
Alcohol is definitely the bigger impact on
Mhm.
sleep. We just looked at all of this data as part of the year in review process, but alcohol was the number one worst thing across the entire WHOOP member
Mm,
base. On average, it reduced your recovery score, I think, by about 13%.
that's right. Yeah.
And late meal, I think, was close to 6%.
Yeah.
With alcohol, like close to bedtime in particular, it's going to disrupt your sleep. Um, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a poison. It puts your liver into this like detox mode. We drive a tremendous amount of resources towards getting that alcohol out of our bodies, and that's counterproductive to recovery, to activate that whole process. Alcohol then breaks down into sugar. And so once we successfully get rid of the alcohol, we've turned it into sugar. And so now our blood sugar is spiking, which is also very activating and counterproductive to good quality sleep. And so when when you drink, say during the day, you're moving, and so you burn that sugar. If you drink and then go to bed, there's sort of nowhere for that to go, and so you just end up with high blood sugar at night, which uh, causes more sleep disruptions and more health challenges. A
Increases
late
your
Yeah, it creates
heart
inflammation,
rates
increases your
and
heart rate. Now, a late meal is kind of the same issue, right? We're supposed to fuel our activity, and there are very real active processes that are happening at night, but our metabolic rate when we're sleeping is lower than it is during the day. Again, like you take in all this sugar and your body has to go and figure out what to do with it, and that's an activating process when during sleep you mostly want to be deactivating. The the reason why this question is fun but also challenging is that at the end of the day, right, whether or not it's a, wine or a martini or whatever, like the alcohol is alcohol. With a late meal, it's not all the same. So if sugar is the biggest part of the problem and, let's say you get in super late, you were they didn't feed you well on the plane or whatever, like you're hungry. So it's 10 o'clock at night, and your choices are kinda like, I could go to bed hungry, or I could eat and then go to bed. So the way to, like, make a late meal not just a total recovery killer is don't eat more than, like, you need to get out of hunger, right? This isn't the time to, like, feast, and focus on high quality fat, with some protein, and try and have as few, especially, like, high glycemic index, like fast carbs as possible, because that's just gonna spike your blood sugar and make it really hard to fall asleep and then to get good quality sleep. And so a late meal doesn't have to be a horrible thing. The problem is like, you get somewhere, it's 10 o'clock at night, the places that tend to serve healthy food tend to not be open at 10 o'clock at night, so you go on Uber Eats, you see what's available, right? You get, like, a burger and fries delivered or something like that, or somebody's like, "Oh, I'll just, like," you're home and it's like, "I'll have a bowl of cereal, I'll have bagel," right? It's like the stuff that, like, takes 5 minutes to make because 'cause you're tired, you're hungry, like, this isn't the time where you're, like, thinking about, like, "Oh, I'll go, like, fire up the grill and make a steak." I just, like, don't think about doing that at 10 o'clock at night. And so really thinking about how your choices matter, and I think that we oversimplify things when we just say, like, late meals are recovery killers. A huge part of that is the types of food people tend to choose, and to be fair, have available to them super late are not foods that are conducive to great sleep, and so I generally don't think it's a great idea to go to bed really, really hungry because that's also disruptive to sleep, and low blood sugar during sleep can be a problem
And
that's a
that's generally an indication that you just have not had sufficient amount of calories in the right macronutrient distribution across the day.
Yeah,
So
you kind of
you
match
should
it up
not
where
feel really adults shouldn't generally feel hungry unless you're doing double sessions,
yeah.
like, before bed, right? So it's yeah,
Maybe it's your environment, maybe you made
right.
bad decisions, not trying to blame anybody for anything, but,
Yeah,
like, you arrive at this situation regardless of how you got there. It's
right,
10 PM and you're hungry. Like, there are
right,
better and worse choices you
yeah.
can make at that point versus, like
Yogurt that has 20 grams of protein, a
yeah,
serving, like, would be a great option. Throw in some walnuts, like,
yeah,
honey, some raspberries, boom, you're good to go,
yeah.
and that's not gonna disrupt your sleep.
Yeah, and I think, like, eating in a really mindful way, like, get
Yeah,
out of hunger and then
mhm.
stop.
Yeah, perfect. Alright, Emily, this is a final question, and this one's great because I think we talked a little bit about stress and just positive reframing for positive psychological functioning. So I love that we've kind of hit on those. Adam sends us a great question.
Mhm.
He's an introvert. As an introvert, I can absolutely relate to this. Hoping you can help out an introvert that needs to manage attending multiple holiday parties this year. I don't want to come off as antisocial, but sometimes I just don't have it in me to make all the commitments for my family and friends. And this year I'm going to my girlfriend's family house for Christmas for the very first time, and I'm nervous about making a bad impression. Do you have any tips on how to bank some of that social energy and how to try to quickly replenish? Well, I can speak just from personal
Sure.
experience and just what I understand about, extroverts and introverts. You know, I think generally, so when we think about this just from kind of first principles, extroverts are going to really derive a lot of mental, physical, and emotional energy from social interactions, whereas introverts really have less tolerance, right? And need a certain kind of special type of conditions in order for those same social engagements to feel restorative and replenishing, right? It just doesn't fill their cup in the same way. So I think for introverts, if we kind of think back to like the banking principle, this absolutely I think applies for introverts going into these social. You want to just make sure that you are not depleted going into these social engagements as
Mhm.
much as possible. And, just what I would do, I take my dog for a walk by myself,
Yeah.
and I think it's okay to create these boundaries, and it's okay to just be like, "Hey, I'm gonna step outside and grab some fresh air and just go for a 5 to 10-minute walk." And that can be enough to kinda get yourself recentered, become replenished,
Mhm.
mentally and physically and emotionally, and so you can kind of go back into a social situation with a bit more energy and a bit more presence. So I think taking those mini breaks throughout are really important. Maybe just literally spending a little extra time in the bathroom, like being mindful in those moments, like just taking time washing your hands. I know it sounds like
Mhm.
so silly, but these are literally things that I do. If part of your routine, is working out, like I know for me, I generally work out kind of by myself. And I think in holiday situations, like maybe that's a great time to actually work out together. But maybe for you as an introvert, like you want to actually go on that run solo,
Mhm.
and just be, kind of plan and carve out that time. Maybe it means you wake up a little bit earlier. So before you even engage anyone in the house, you've already had some of that lone time where again, you're kind of building up that energy.
Yeah. I think, I go back a little bit to 2 things. One is, we started by talking about appraisal, and so really focusing on, reminding yourself and centering yourself before these what will be, admittedly, like, a lot of probably intense social interactions, and I don't know if this is the first time you're meeting the family, like, that comes with pressure. So really focus on the positives and why you're excited about the trip. And then I think, like, every healthy relationship has boundaries, and if you aren't in the practice of setting those, like, this is good practice.
Yeah.
And so really think about how you can create that space. And I think a lot of times people don't even realize, like, it feels so scary and stressful, but it can almost like one, like, people don't want the pressure of entertaining you from sun up to sundown all day long, and
Mhm.
so it could be nice for the family that, like, you demonstrate a comfort with independence. And it's something that I would definitely talk to your girlfriend about. Like, will I offend anybody if XYZ, right? Like, even if you're not in the habit of exercising, you can just say something like, I really want to make an effort while I have the week off of work to try and get a little bit of exercise every day. Is this, can I carve this out and enlist your girlfriend's help in like setting and adhering to this boundary and creating that space? I think having some centering me time, like you said, in the morning is really powerful. And also think about, there are probably places where you can be the family hero while getting your solo time, right? You can offer to go do the coffee run in the morning, or
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna go pick up
Yeah.
breakfast, or,
Or the
um
milk's low. Hey, I'm
yeah,
gonna
"Hey,
run to
I
the
noticed
grocery
the milk
store.
was low,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go run out and get it. Do you need anything?" And now all of a sudden, like, you're the hero,
Yeah, yeah.
and protecting everybody's time, or,
Mhm.
volunteer to do the dishes while everyone else is in
Yeah.
the living room, right? You can, like,
Yeah.
find these little moments, where it doesn't have to feel like, "Oh, I'm getting away from you," or anything like that, which might feel harder, and
Yeah, yeah.
instead it's like, "Oh my goodness, like, your new boyfriend, he's so helpful, like, so
Yeah,
wonderful,"
yeah.
and so, those moments you can look for and
Mhm.
create. But I also think, like, in a healthy relationship, like, it's important to be able to say to your girlfriend, like, "I'm so excited to meet your family or spend
Mhm.
time with your family, but, like, hopefully, I'm an introvert,
Yeah.
um, and, like, can you help me carve this time out in the
Mhm.
morning? Here are, like, things that I'm going to really need." Because if you, quote, unquote, "selfishly," and it's not selfish, but for some people, it's, like, easier to think about it that way. If you, like, selfishly take that time in the morning and, like, center yourself,
Mhm.
you're gonna show up in a way that you're so much
Mhm.
happier with, and,
Your gas
like,
tank's kind of already full before you
yeah,
even enter the day. Full for
yeah,
you,
well, for
what it means
you,
to be full for you. Yeah.
and then, like, you're going to be more joyful, right? Somebody
Mhm.
whose tank is empty is
Yeah.
usually not that pleasant to be around,
Right.
um, and then, like, you're losing and they're losing,
Yeah.
so, do less beautifully, right, instead
Mhm.
of trying to do everything. And then the other thing
Yeah.
for holiday parties, because there can definitely be a lot, and it can
Mm.
feel like, the entire from Thanksgiving to New Year's, it's like party after party. This is a little bit more complicated when you're, like, staying at your in-laws' house, but, like, in general, it's okay to set a boundary that, like, I leave all parties at 9. If you're there for an hour and a half, like, you've done your job,
Mhm.
and, I think, like, people aren't going to be, hopefully, aren't gonna be mad at you, and it's not rude to then,
Mhm.
like, take what you need and go, and so I think sometimes people get so all or nothing, like, "I don't wanna go to that party, it's gonna go until 2 a.m." And it's like, well, like, are they locking you in a room? Is it, like, on a boat where you can't get off? Like, if
Mhm.
it's an office holiday party, like, you can leave at 9 a.m., you can even leave at, like, 7. So, show up, like, be present, enjoy as much as you can, and, celebrating with everybody, and then when you start to feel your tank getting low, give
Mhm.
yourself permission to say, "See you on Monday, I'm outta
Yeah.
here." Um, and if you don't, like, constantly drain yourself, then it's much easier to kinda turn it around and do it again,
Right.
and you can actually start to really enjoy it,
Mhm.
because, there are a lot of things that are fun for an hour and not fun for 5.
Yeah.
So go do the hour, enjoy it, and then give yourself permission to leave.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I hope our listeners can take away some nuggets and truly make this a rewarding and special holiday season.
Yeah, happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Big thank you to Emily and Kristen for all of their holiday hacks. We're certainly wishing you a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays wherever you are in the world. A reminder, you can check out the new Cristiano Ronaldo bands. That's at whoop.com. We've got a home and an away if you want to celebrate Cristiano and all things his career. That's a wrap, folks. Wishing you again an amazing holiday season. Stay healthy and stay in the green.